Hello, everyone. My name is Geoff Gordon. I am the Vice President of Marketing at MainConcept, and I'm coming to you live from sunny San Diego. I'm also wearing a collared shirt for the first time in about, I don't know how long, many months. I'd like to extend a special welcome to all of you joining us from afar, as well as those who will be catching us later on demand. One little bit of housekeeping before we get started. Everyone but myself and the panelists are going to be on, everybody else but myself and the panelists will be on mute for the duration of the event. So if you have any questions, use the Q&A button. You should be able to see it at the bottom right and side of the WebEx app. And if you have any questions for the on-demand listeners, you can email us anytime at marketing@mainconcept.com. Again, that's marketing@mainconcept.com. Okay, so we have an action-packed webinar planned to get everyone prepared for 8K. By the time we finish today, you'll be up to date on industry adoption, specific use cases and options to improve performance, as well as device rollouts and compatibility. So let me introduce our panelists that we have, starting with our guests. First of all, we have Chris Chinnock joining us from the 8K Association. He's the executive director over there. Then we have Carey, who is the head of cinematic innovation for Samsung Research America. Thank you both for joining us. And then from MainConcept, we have Thomas Kramer, who is our vice president of product management, and we have Nick Ryan, who heads product marketing for MainConcept. So before we get it kicked off with Chris, I do want to take a minute to introduce MainConcept to those of you who may not be so familiar with it. So if you can go to the next slide, we'll start off there. So who is MainConcept? For over 25 years, we've been leaders in professional codec technology, and we're trusted by some of the world's most innovative brands. We've got a really big list of customers, but some of them include Adobe, Autodesk, Corel, Wowza, Avid, Sony, Nikon, Grass Valley, Dalit, Endeavor Streaming, EditShare, Magix, Playbox, and many more. That's just a quick sample there. We offer the highest quality and best performing, most reliable SDKs and applications in the industry. And we develop products for all parts of the production workflow that can be used by everyone from novice to a guru. We've been around so long that we predate the Ks, that is 2K and 4K. So we go back into the 90s, and we've been contributing to the industry throughout those evolutions. Next slide. Our technology can be customized for each customer, similar to a unique and purpose-built strand of DNA. We offer the largest library of codec SDKs and specialized products for different industries and use cases. And our professional services team ties it all together with expert customization. And that's how we can support you from glass to glass with solutions that can help you create, deliver, and play. So now on with the program. To start us off, we have Chris Chinnock, who's the executive director of the 8K Association. Last week, Chris and the 8KA hosted a webinar of their own to update the industry on the current state of 8K. And today he's going to share a snapshot of that with us. Welcome, Chris.
Thank you very much, Jeff. Next slide, please. And I guess the next one. Okay, so yeah, as you mentioned, I did actually a pretty comprehensive webinar last week. It was an hour and 20 minutes. So this is the 8-minute or so version of that. So let's start with 8K in general. So I'm not sure how many folks on the audience are familiar with 8K. So let's just start with some of the basics here. It is the next trend. We've seen a number of transitions in resolution, SD to HD, HD to 4K, and now to 8K. And I think it's important to note that these are not, at least certainly the 8K is not just a resolution transition. It also includes all the HDR elements as well. So it's really the full package here, and I think people sometimes kind of forget that aspect. So I just want to make sure it's clear. This is HDR 8K that we're moving into, and as you might suspect, it is the best level of both capture and display. And when done well, it is a stunning image. I'm sure most of you remember seeing their first HD or your first 4K images and just going, wow. Well, it's the same thing's happening with 8K for a lot of folks. And so just having that 8K capture adds so much flexibility. I'll talk a little bit about that in the next slide, if you would, please. So let's see, where are we? In terms of this whole ecosystem, this is a very high-level snapshot, but there are 8K TVs out there today from all the major brands, actually. And these represent the top of their pyramid of products. So not only do they have the highest resolution, they also have the best processing. They're all HDR. These are the best TVs you can buy right now. They happen to be 8K, so that's also a good thing. All the production equipment has been developed. It is available. NHK has been broadcasting regularly since December 2018. So then they help spur that ecosystem development, and now a lot of companies offer 8K products. It's not just those few Japanese brands at this point right now. YouTube and Vimeo actually have thousands of 8K clips up on their websites. They're short. There are a lot of natures and documentary type films, but it's a start. And this is kind of the way it started with 4K as well. We're also seeing major sporting events that are trialing the use of 8K cameras. And we're going to see more of that as well. I mean, COVID-19 has delayed a lot of that going forward, but I think this, assuming the pandemic ends in a reasonable time, we should see a pickup of more trial events at sports and other venues. There actually are some 8K subscription services. For example, the Explorers is a French company that offers 8K content to Samsung TVs with a Samsung app. So it's small and limited, I'll grant, but it started. And you may be aware that the next generation consoles are going to be 8K capable. Unclear if there'll be a lot of 8K games, but certainly being able to play back content, potential 8K content through those platforms is going to be important. So I think the bottom line here is the ecosystem is actually very similar to the state of what the 4K ecosystem looked like 6 or 7 years ago. There were some challenges, but those have mostly been overcome for 4K right now. So I think we're going to see history repeating basically for 8K. Next slide, please. So I think one of the key takeaways that we've learned from talking with folks in this 8K ecosystem is that the workflows for 8K are very similar to 4K and 2K, and I think Des, who will speak later, will back that up. There are some pain points, and what we've kind of identified is that you do need more processing power to do 8K. You need more memory and storage, and transport and bandwidth is always going to be an issue. Not surprising that those are the kind of the top pain points that one would see, but guess what? Those were exactly the same things we saw with 4K, and those barriers have fallen, and we expect to see those barriers fall again because based on the discussions we had to develop our ecosystem report, all of the solutions to these pain points are moving forward and moving in the right direction. So I think those barriers will fall just as they did for 4K. Next slide. So I'm not going to get deep into distribution codecs other than to note that we are in a fairly, actually a very unique time right now because we have a lot of codecs either out there today or very close to coming online. So HEVC, of course, is your kind of mainline codec right now for 4K and is being used for 8K as well. AV1 is coming online very quickly. And in development are several other codecs, the VVC, the Versatile Video Codec, EVC, and LC-EVC. And those last two are not to be confused. It sounds like they might be similar, but they're actually quite different. So LC-EVC is, think of it more as a pre-processing kind of a capability, so it can be used with any of the above codecs as well. And then there's the China-based Industry Alliance, which has their own versions of HEVC and VVC in development as well. So I'm going to let's move on to the next slide. I don't want to get bogged down in all that. That's a whole discussion. So we do have a distribution challenge, however. Clearly, 8K content is a lot of data, and what NHK is using today with HEVC encoding is 80 to 100 megabits over a satellite service, and that sucks up an entire transponder to deliver that service. So while they've proven that this can be done, it's really not a long-term solution. That's not commercially viable. So we will have to move down to bandwidths that are more mainstream, and probably somewhere in the 20 to 30 megabits per, maybe up to 50 megabits for 8K is what's going to have to be reasonable for commercial deployment. Is what we think anyway. So there are going to be some near-term solutions. These new codecs will certainly help, and these are very close to ratification within MPEG and going to be rolling out in the next year to 2 years, depending on the ecosystem. But there's also this concept now of smart streaming, and I put smart in quotes because it's kind of a very loose definition right now. But the concept here is we want to encourage content to be mastered in 8K and then smartly downscale that to a 4K resolution package with some sort of metadata that captures how it was smartly downscaled. It then gets distributed in 4K and then smartly upscaled by the 8K TV. And ideally, that image quality can now be close to a native full 8K delivery solution. So that's something I think the industry, at least the 8K Association, would certainly like to see implemented. And I think there are clearly some advancements going on in the industry in that direction, but it needs nurturing. Next slide, please. So in the webinar we did last week, we did some online polls. These were very active polls that were done with the attendees. It was over 100 attendees. And we just asked them a couple of basic questions here. So I'll just read this. 8K workflows are basically similar to 4K workflows, but with added storage, processing, and bandwidth requirements. So this was kind of, is this valid? Do the attendees agree with what we found in our report? And I think the answers do validate that conclusion. And the second survey was developing a cost-effective streaming solution is the key to opening up 8K streaming services, and we see very strong agreement with that. So new codecs and potentially smart streaming services, I think, are going to be key elements of this solution. So we were happy to see attendees kind of agreeing with our conclusions, and and both of these things are now kind of fundamental for the mission of the 8K Association. And speaking of, on the next slide, let me tell you a little bit about the 8K Association. So we're a not-for-profit, and our goal is really to help educate both consumers and professionals about 8K and to really encourage the expansion of that whole 8K ecosystem. And I want to be clear that we want to embrace all aspects of 8K. So even if companies are just capturing in 8K and still finishing in 2K or 4K, that's fine. It's moving the ecosystem forward. 8K capture for VR applications or for medical applications, it's all fine. It's all part of the 8K ecosystem. A lot of that's going to be HDR, so it's all good stuff. We also have a consumer initiative as well. We have a discover8k.com website now, and this is really designed to aid in consumers making buying decisions about 8K products. And we also have a certification and activity for 8K TVs at this time. So we have a whole specification for the performance and interface levels of the TV, and those can be certified by the 8K Association, and will bear this logo as you see on the right. Next slide, please. Here's just a list of the current members. As you can see, there's a number of TV brands and panel makers. So we've been clearly early been driven by the TV makers and panel brands, and that kind of is reflected in the and the TV certifications that we have. But we've been expanding the membership throughout the ecosystem. So you can see there's now streaming service providers, technology equipment providers, chipset providers, and content creators. And speaking of content creators, we have a new initiative now to reach out and identify a lot of independent filmmakers because we think those are kind of the leaders and the pioneers in developing the 8K ecosystem. They're eager to capture and even produce in 8K, and we have some special membership options available for them now as well. And I think that's it from my slides. Could you go to the next one? It is. I'll pass it back to you, Nick.
Thank you, Chris. That was very insightful and a great way to kick off this webinar on 8K. So we know where we stand today. Next, I'm going to pass it off to Nick Ryan, who, as I mentioned earlier, is he heads product marketing for MainConcept. So take it away, Nick.
Thanks, Geoff. Yeah, so like Geoff said, my name is Nick Ryan. I head up product marketing here at MainConcept. Next slide, please. So adoption is growing and the industry is adapting. And we're starting to see this. 8K is beginning to take hold, and it's not incredibly surprising. Like Chris said, it can be easy to become overly focused on the technological hurdles, the data file size, the distribution challenges, but we need to remember 4K, right? So not long ago, the prospect of an increase in pixel size to 4K was a pretty scary idea, but now the industry has largely accepted it as being a game changer in how professionals can frame their shots, manage workflows, and handle things like post-production. So I have no doubt that soon we'll be having the same conversation about 16K and looking back at 8K as that accepted game changer the same way that we have 4K. So it's probably true that everyone here and everyone in the glass-to-glass or the lens-to-lens ecosystem is thinking about 8K in some way. And at MainConcept, we've noticed an increase in adoption in certain ways. In 2020, there's now several TVs capable of 8K playback and some surprisingly affordable 8K cameras as well. But equally important is the fact that we're seeing some independent professionals, we're seeing some studios actually start to film in 8K. And there's a few reasons why they do this. So the first is that they can future-proof by archiving in a higher resolution. And the second is that they can have a better 4K or even 2K output by shooting in 8K. They get better flexibility, better stabilization, more options for editing. But really, it's that future proofing. They end up with content that is resilient for the changes that we all believe are going to take place. And that's really an important statement and kind of the basis of this entire presentation. Next slide, please. Okay, so just quickly looking at the present, how we're seeing customers apply 8K today. I'm not going to go into too much detail here. I think Chris did a great job summarizing this. But mentioned archival, that is a great practice to start archiving in a 8K, even if your output is going to be 2K or 4K. Broadcast, Chris mentioned NHK in Japan. They launched an 8K broadcast channel after a very long series of research and development using the HEVC encoding scheme. Contribution, so getting multiple frames out of one 8K capture. Digital signage, this is an interesting one, and we've seen this with our customers at MainConcept as being a real hotspot for innovation in 8K. Using these new 8K displays for advertising, event signage, or even things like medical imaging with grayscale, this is definitely being very embraced as a current present application for 8K. Chris mentioned the gaming consoles, that the new consoles coming out will support 8K, and then showcase user-generated content. not only is YouTube actually streaming 8K content, or can you find it on YouTube, but as of this year, you can actually stream that onto certain 8K compatible displays, TVs, so long as they have that AV1 hardware decoding capability. So really interesting. And the conclusion that I draw when I look at this is that we're seeing more 8K in the wild, but obviously there's still some challenges ahead that we need to overcome. Next slide, please. And that brings me to the future, right? 8K, the future. So there's challenges, but they're being chipped away at. And MainConcept has this unique perspective into the industry, given that so much professional video is processed using editing technologies that are powered by MainConcept, and also just our extensive partner network. So we have a unique vision into where the industry is heading. Smaller file size, so compression is getting better and better. Quality is getting higher, encoding is getting faster. So these are all the things that will lead to 8K having that more ubiquitous adoption. Production pipelines. As the production pipelines change and adapt to 8K, the entire ecosystem tends to evolve around it. We've seen this before. We've seen it with 4K. We've seen it with other technological advancements. Chris mentioned scaling and that this will make it possible to essentially enjoy higher quality video as some of these more kind of distribution challenges continue to be worked on. And then, of course, the new codecs, right? So there's a lot of new standards that are coming out: EVC, versatile video coding, EVC, and LCEVC. And LCEVC, the low complexity enhancement video coding, this is really interesting. Like Chris mentioned, this is compatible with a baseline codec like HEVC and can immediately offer bandwidth savings by extending that compression capability. So this is one that is on MainConcept's roadmap, and we have some interesting data to show you there as well. So similar to the last slide, when you look at this, the 8K future at a macro level, the takeaway that I have is that it's unsafe, like actually unsafe for studios, producers, the technology providers that support them to build their workflow and their tech stack based on the current state of technology. Really, you need that flexibility to scale for the future without having to continually overhaul your entire production pipeline. And we're seeing this idea of the present embracing the future. We're really starting to see that. Next slide, please. Okay, LCEVC. I promised you a little data, and here it is. So VNova is a partner of ours, and we just received some preliminary test data from them where they encoded an 8K file using HEVC enhanced with LCEVC. The results are very promising. You can see them here. Bitrate requirements were reduced by 45% to achieve a VMAP score of 90. 45%. And if for the VMAP score of 95, there was still very significant bandwidth saving or bitrate reduction. So this was just one 8K test file, and testing will certainly continue, but we see this as very promising data. And that's why MainConcept will continue to work with VNova on ultimately an integration into the MainConcept SDK. Next slide, please. Okay, so looking a little bit more at MainConcept HEVC and what makes this unique and very well suited for 8K as well as 4K. I think everyone here understands the benefits of HEVC as compared to H.264 and kind of the earlier generations for certain applications. But what's really important is that there's well over 1 billion devices enabled for HEVC. So it's widely accessible format. It has a very wide playback ecosystem. So on top of the fact that it has very high quality, it has lower bitrate coding, it has this proven market insertion that makes it an excellent codec for 4K as well as 8K. So this year, MainConcept released a new version, the 12 series of HEVC. And there's a lot of features and options there. I'll go over some of the just coolest ones, but first, just quickly talking about the underlying algorithm. Moscow State University, MSU, runs an annual Codec Comparison. So it's an independent testing of the biggest H.265 codecs out there from different providers. And in this case, MainConcept was the leading codec with more than 20% efficiency when compared to the open source equivalent X265. So this is really important because when you think of the potentially very large data footprints for 4K and of course 8K, they can be so large that really any savings in encoding time and efficiency and that reduction in file size has a very large impact. In terms of decoding, MainConcept HEVC allows for 8K 120 real-time playback with up to 10-bit 444 progressive. So this may not always be required, but or at least yet, but just to say that this is a very flexible underlying software. Okay, few features. So we have a lot of customers that have seen value for 4K, for 8K in both production and live ecosystems. And this integrates with FFmpeg. So if you're a user of FFmpeg, you get all of these benefits natively from within your existing FFmpeg environment. And then save it. So this is a patented technology by MainConcept. It stands for Smart Adaptive Bitrate Encoding Technology. What it does is allows for intelligent ABR encoding in a single instance by sharing that processing data across up to 12 different profiles. So by sharing that processing data across all these different profiles, you can reduce the total encoding time by yet another 30%. So there's a trend here, efficiency stacked on efficiency, and that's how you get to a workflow that can handle the massive data requirements of 8K. Okay, so moving on, bottom feature you see on the screen, this is probably the most interesting feature. It's called hybrid GPU acceleration. Next slide, please. Okay, so hybrid GPU, we get a lot of inquiries from customers, a lot of interest. This is another MainConcept pioneered technology. This enables you to dial in the best of both software encoding and hardware encoding to accelerate the overall process by up to 2.5 times. So it takes MainConcept software encoding, these algorithms for very fine bitrate control and quality, and combines it with this just power of the NVIDIA RTX architecture. So that's where you get that result, is you get that gross acceleration of the encoding, but you also maintain that quality and control. And that's a problem we hear from our customers as well. And I'm sure some people here can sympathize with this, which is you want faster encoding, even for 4K, even for 2K, or you're trying to build a stack that can support 8K, and you know that hardware offers power, but the quality often is something you have to compromise on, or it's not as good as you'd get with good software alone. So a hybrid GPU solves this problem, solves this challenge by optimizing CPU and GPU processing efficiency and maintaining that high quality. So for 8K, back to this, technology like this saves time in the encoding process, but also makes things like archival or live encoding both realistic and much more cost effective. I'll show you an example of what the hardware requirements might look like to run something like this. Next slide, please. Okay, so when you're looking on the left here, for 8K live encoding with MainConcept using hybrid GPU technology, the basic hardware, you've got your 2 Intel Xeon Gold processors, you've got the 2 NVIDIA GeForce RTX 2070 supercards, the one NVIDIA GeForce RTX 2070, and of course the capture card. So all these prices here are based on manufacturer suggested retail. So that's where this analysis comes from, meaning that you can get this set up operational at a relatively low cost off the shelf and then get that 2.5x faster processing. If you compare this to a competitor, not using this hybrid GPU technology, hardware requirements that they've demonstrated for 8K live encoding is a bit of a different story. So in this case, they're running multi-CPU, high-end server setup with multiple Xeon Platinum processors, expensive processors, right? So requiring such a compute-heavy installation like this makes it more than twice as expensive to encode 8K live. So how is this possible, right? And here's the difference. We've been doing this a very long time. So Geoff mentioned MainConcept's been in the business for more than a quarter of a century of codecs, and we've had years to just optimize and create highly efficient HEVC software and develop these new technologies responding to demands from our customers and things we see in the market, like hybrid GPU. So this means that you could build an 8K ready stack using off-the-shelf components at 4K prices. So if you're building an 8K, a system that can handle 8K, or you just want to update any workflow, you want to have a faster 4K encoding, 2K, you can set it up at a relatively inexpensive cost and still be future-proofing your stack for 8K live using this MainConcept technology. Next slide, please. Okay, to wrap up here, you'll notice a trend to what I'm saying, or I hope you do, and it's this. You can significantly improve your current 4K workflow today while preparing yourself for 8K, the reality of 8K tomorrow. Whether it's file-based, such as archival, adaptive bitrate, live, or a specific application like digital signage or contribution, medical imaging, really doesn't matter. Prepare yourself for 8K, and improve your current workflow at the same time. Okay, so there's a few different ways you can do this. No one's environment is exactly the same. So everything you see here supports up to 8K and hybrid GPU technology. The HEVC encoder SDK, which of course is both file-based or live encoding, our FFmpeg integration, where you can get all this technology, including hybrid GPU, and we've got some great demos on our YouTube page if you want to see how that works. MainConcept to go, which are modular containerized versions of this technology for plug-and-play application. If live is specifically what you're looking for, MainConcept Live Encoder is an application. It's all in one. Or if on demand or file-based encoding and conversion is more relevant to your business or workflow, Total Code Studio is an excellent application for that as well. So all of these are based on the same underlying technology in that they all support hybrid GPU and up to 8K. Okay, next slide, please. So I'm going to introduce Thomas Kramer. He's the VP of Product Management at MainConcept, and he's going to give a demonstration of how this technology works. So, Thomas, take it away.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, thanks, Nick, anyway, for the introduction. Really great stuff. But I'm sure everybody is, after all this talking, everybody's looking forward to some product demos. So that's why I'm here. I'm going to do that, and I hope you will like it. What I'm going to show you, and Nick just showed it here on the previous slide, there was in the middle one, if you remember, there was the so-called MainConcept Live Encoder, and I'm going to show you a demo of that application with HEVC 8K live encoding. And that will, of course, utilize this hybrid GPU technology that was also mentioned here earlier. So Nick showed how you can actually configure hardware, at a fraction of cost if you compare that with a competitive, What I will do now is show you how this will be actually become reality on the software side. Next slide before we go there. Let's go to the next slide. This is how a typical use case for the MainConcept Live Encoder looks like. You would see here in the middle one the MainConcept Live Encoder. You typically have, the encoder itself is located either in the master control room or somewhere where you do the production, or even on site on an event venue. You have two options here, of course, SDI capturing or IP stream input for the live encoder. The output here, since it's an OTT streaming encoder application, you would have typically packaging and encoding for internet delivery, and that is going through CDNs in typical cases. Of course, you will always have an archive of your live recording, for catch-up TV or for other purposes, and of course also for archiving itself as well. So what I will go and show you here while I switch back to my screen soon, I will show you this live encoder with an actual SDI capture of live 8K. This live encoder application will then perform the 8K hybrid GPU encoding. And what we're going to show also is the playback, but not through CDN, because this is a demo and we don't have that here prepared. We have just playback of the stream locally from a built-in HTTP server. Okay, please switch the, thank you. I'm going to do that. Okay, just one note though before we start. Since we're all working from home these days, the hardware setup for this demo is only located in our office, and so we did the actual demo in advance of that webinar. So please be aware, and this is recorded on the screen capture while we did that recording, that demo in the office advance. And so what you see here is kind of a playback, and I'll give you an introduction, all the details. But of course, the playback and the demo is all, in real. So it's a complete correct demo. Okay, so what you see here now is the actual screen of the encoding server. That is just to show you that currently there is a system with a CPU running on almost no usage. And there's the 3 GPUs that also Nick mentioned before during his presentation. So those will be utilized for the encoding. And of course, the GPUs will take a large part in all this thing. So what I will do now is I will connect to the encoder application through the browser and show you how the configuration works. So once connected in the browser, I'm going to set up the actual capturing, and that is going to be an 8K SDI capture. So you see here, selecting the source and adding that in the UI. So here, I can show you here the Arja Kona 5 capture board, which supports the 8K. So you can easily select that, it's auto-detected, and we have that as a source available for both video and audio in the UI. When that's done, I'm going to switch to the 10-bit source format as well here, because we want to do 10-bit. Good. Saving that, and next will be the actual encoding parameters. Going to the jobs and then the encoding here. And that will be, a preset for compatibility between HLS and Dash. So it's quite important that we have a preset that is defined so that we can reuse the same encoding for both adaptive bit streaming format, Dash and HLS. So that's done, and I have, if you saw that, the target default bitrate for this 8K encoding is 100 meg, but of course this can be changed here. For the demo, we use the default with 100 megabit. Just also to see and show that this is actually capable, the whole system, the bandwidth and the data transmission is able to do this huge amount of data in real time, 60 frames per second. So now I'm going to set stopping here to show you that the option is for the hybrid GPU, because of course at that server you wouldn't be able to do an 8K live encoding with just pure software. We've deliberately chosen a view to show that the actual cost is, at a fraction of competition. So that's why we have this so-called hybrid GPU, and we're using the GPU-driven mode. That driven mode is on this side here, what Nick already explained, utilizing both the software and the hardware in its optimal way. It's doing that by selecting the most decisions, frame decisions, and bitrate control, and also the pre-processing, everything in the MainConcept software codec, and using the GPU part only for the pure frame encoding. So that's why we call it the driven mode. We're just giving pretty much all the direction to the GPU for the stupid and simple frame encoding. Once that's done, selecting here, you can also see that I select the 3 GPU cards that are detected by the software. And that's already the configuration of the encoding. I'm going to save that here and going to the next one, which is the output. And the output is using that encoding that we already selected here. The output is then, of course, where the interesting part was done with the archiving format, with HLS and dash configurations. This one now here configures the archiving format. That is typically in a 20-second chunk size, just a simple MP4 file. We can also take a look at those files later on. The archiving here now keeps a duration of 20 seconds. For the HLS encoding, we do use the fragmented MP4 file format and set a segment size of 120 seconds. Same for dash, keeping the configuration similar. Same, keeping the duration here same. Okay, once that's done, selecting all the encoding profiles and just save them. Okay, and that's all for the configuration already. So I can now click Start, and that already starts the actual encoding. So it's as simple as that. All the auto detection of the hardware is done. It is preset based for 8K live encoding, and we configure the archiving and streaming formats. Okay, now let's see how the output will actually generated. So first of all, take a look at the monitoring tab and the CPU manager, just to show you that the encoding is actually performing here. You see the CPU at the top is utilized only at around 25%, which is for such a, low to middle end server CPU quite low, while it's actually doing an 8K live encoding here. And you see that it's actually using most of the power from the 3 GPUs. And that is utilized by MainConcept and driven by MainConcept software encoding. Okay. Once that's done, we can also take a look at the actual output. So we can see that the encoding runs and works, and it is performing here on the system. Now we're switching to take a look at the actual encodings. First, let's take a look at the archive files. I'm navigating here to the location, to the folder on that server where the archive is configured. And if you remember the 20-second chunks, here they are now created, and I can just take a look using media info and see that the archiving format is HEVC 10-bit 60 frames, and it's always 20-second chunks. So highlighting that here, this is where the encoding happens, and these files are just archival files from the encoder. Next, I'm going to show the actual dash and HLS output. First looking at the dash, and I'm going to navigate now to actually find the URL of the dash manifest file in order to use that for playback on my other computer. So here I have the URL of that playlist, manifest file, and I'm going to copy that and use on, and if you see here, I'm switching back to another computer. I'm using that now in Pod Player, which is, a good player actually for Dash and HLS playback in high resolution. Using that here now to playback the Dash content, copying that URL into the window, using and playback, and that is all that needs to be done to playback the file here. You see that the NASA content is actually played back. You see that the player is able, it's not able to fully perform on 60 frames, but that's the configuration of the player system only. So same thing with the HLS content, showing that this is actually encoded and created in parallel, going to use the playlist file from the HLS packaging, copying that into my player application on the other computer. And you can see that it's as easy as it was for Dash, just simply using the URL of the playlist file, and playback with HLS works as well. And here we are. Okay, so that content is from NASA, and yeah, it's content that was prepared, and we can use that here. Lastly, I'm going to show just a quick playback of the actual archive file. So stopping here the player, switching back to the actual encoding machine, and we'll show that yeah, you can see that there's already been more chunks of the archival file being created. I'm going to stop the encoding now just to take a look, and you can see on the left side, the CPU and GPU's usage is going down as well. Now, as a next step, taking a quick look at the archival files. Those are, of course, rendered and also written during the live encoding, and they should be at a chunk size and file size of about 20 seconds. And going to do a quick playback using Media Player Classic, and you see the same content that is as an archive file. This is the one of those 20-second chunks. And that was my demo. So I hope you liked it, and I hope you could actually see how easy it is to configure software live encoding on such a machine with hybrid GPU. So I hope you liked it. Thank you very much. Giving back to Nick, I think, right?
Thanks, Thomas. Just wanted to, I'll take it, yeah, just quick. So thanks. I want to mention that was our live encoder. That was the new version that's coming out very soon. So if you have any questions about that, obviously you can get in touch with us. And then just a reminder, I know we're running a little tight on time, but if you do have any questions, you can pop them into the Q&A box at the bottom of your screen, and we'll be answering them at the end. So finally, we have Carey. So Des has quite the industry resume. In fact, I believe he's the only one on this call with an IMDb profile, at least one that has over 100 credits to his name. So as I mentioned at the start, Des currently works with Samsung Research as the head of cinematic innovation. Thanks, Des. Take it away.
Great. Thank you, Geoff. Thomas, that was a fascinating demo. Thank you for that. During this talk, I'm actually going to talk more about how we got to this point, the revolution of resolution, and where we're going. So I'm going to put it in some sort of historical context. Some things people might know, some things people may not. But it's really important to understand the past to see how we got to where we are right now. So I've been very lucky over the last 25 years to have experienced and been in the trenches of a number of big transitions in the filmmaking industry. The transition from film to data acquisition, the embracing of computer generated imagery as a storytelling tool as well. We have to remember that it's really only in the last 25 years that we have really jumped leaps and bounds when it comes to filmmaking, post-production, display and really what consumers want. It's consumers that are constantly demanding more. They want to get more out of the content that is available to them, and as a result, the bar keeps on getting raised, which I find, you know, very, very exciting. It's always been my strong opinion as well that to understand the filmmaking process and data acquisition, you need to understand film. So for the longest time, film negative was the gold standard when it came to archival. And now for the first time ever, we are able to capture at resolutions considerably higher than what 35mm can offer. So with 6K, 8K, 12K cameras now, filmmakers have more tools at their disposal than ever before. I think that it's really exciting. In saying that, often embracing change can be difficult, and that was certainly the case with the digital intermedia process and the transition from film to data. There was pushback there, and there was pushback from the studios until they realized it was actually a very good thing. And it became the norm. So a lot of people forget that this revolutionary process ever happened. I recently gave a talk actually, and one of the gentlemen I was talking with thought that the DI process was something that had always been around, and it hadn't, and we had to fight for that, you know, all that time ago. And what that process did was allow filmmakers to get more out of their content. And it was just really exciting. So I think when we talk about 8K, people tend to automatically assume that it is out of reach to the normal independent filmmaker, and that it is only available to large filmmakers and big studios. And that, quite honestly, is simply not the case. Historically speaking, the biggest changes in our community have come from independent filmmakers. The smaller, more innovative filmmakers who drive and have the ambition to push the envelope with content. I know myself and Chris are certainly seeing that on with the AK Association, and I really think it's fabulous. So moving on, and just from general research, more independent filmmakers are shooting at higher resolutions than actual studio projects. So I think that's something really commendable, is that the independent filmmaker is driving the future. So more often than not, studios are the last to embrace these changes, and that's for a variety of reasons that I won't get into right now. But if somebody wanted to ask a question, I'd be very happy to jump on that. Also, when it comes to workflow, the 8K workflow is virtually identical to the 2K and 4K workflows. Yes, the data footprint is larger, but that doesn't necessarily mean it's considerably more expensive. As a matter of fact, to process 8K data now, and this is from talking with a number of my colleagues in the post-production world, is only 50% more than 4K, instead of 4 times the cost of 4K, which is to make up 8K. Also, post-production facilities have just become masters of creative data processing. And I'm happy to say that I work very closely with these post facilities, and what is coming out is incredibly exciting. Sorry, I'm just going to refresh something here really fast. So when we talk about 8K again, and this was something that Chris and Nick, touched on, it's really important to talk about future proofing. In the past, the film negative was the ultimate master. And in order to remaster a project, you need to go back to that 35mm negative. So as I mentioned, we're at the stage now where we're shooting at much more higher resolution than what 35mm can offer. And to measure 35mm, we're at about 5.6K. So as many as you know, remastering a project can be a very expensive process, going back to 35mm. We're rescanning. at a higher resolution. And as a result, this can add artifacts. It can add scratches. You're going to have to deal with dust. So it can become quite an expensive process. And that's why I think with 8K data, it is so much easier to get back to where you want to be and what you initially shot at. So also with 8K data, and this was just something we did recently, we have the option to conform at 2K, at 4K, or at 8K. And as AI upscaling becomes more robust, we will soon start to see larger Hollywood blockbusters shooting at higher resolutions. One example of this right now, which is a very exciting prospect for the future, is Jurassic World Dominion right now is shooting on 35mm, and it's shooting on the DXL2, Panavision's DXL2 8K camera. So I find that really fascinating that the studios are embracing the fact that this higher resolution, they know it's there, they don't quite know what to do with it right now, but they will, and we're going to help show them. So it is, if we could put up slide 1 that I had there, because I'm going to start getting into some of these larger VFX shows. When we look at 2020, I know that is a year not a lot of people really want to talk about, myself included. But when we look at 2020, 90% of the larger visual effects shows are working in 2K. Even if the final output is going to be 4K, they will be up-resing for that 4K DCP. So very important to remember, 90% of these larger, big movies are only delivering their VFX in 2K. At Samsung, when it comes to display, we're very focused on the AI upscaling aspect. When it comes to resolution, we want to work very closely with VFX vendors. We certainly are working close with game developers, that as processing becomes more robust, visual effects vendors will be able to turn over at a higher resolution. And I think that's very exciting. As a manufacturer, Samsung, we've come up with an AI ScaleNet, which allows to deliver 8K video on 4K bandwidth, and similarly 4K video on HD bandwidth. So as processing power increases, VFX vendors will start delivering in higher resolutions, and will make the future proofing of this content even more robust if we were to go back and remaster. So it's really quite fascinating, and I think it's really important. If we could put up slide 2, please, or slide 3. I think slide 3. This is an example of our AI upscaling when we do take our source. And if we want to go to the next slide, yes, this is slightly simulated, but oh, sorry, was there a slide 4? There we go. This will kind of give you an idea. If we were just to blow up the regular image to 8K without any sort of AI, what you'd be getting is on the left-hand side, as opposed to with a lot of the AI upscaling that we're doing now. And certainly the 8K Association is working with a number of people to come up with the most robust way to give studios what they want. And similarly, when it comes to video gaming, I don't think we can really mention visual effects without mention gaming, as the two of them are virtually go hand in hand right now. Certainly with some of the filmmaking steps that the future is providing with virtual production, so on and so forth, we're borrowing a lot from the gaming industry. So if we want to, we can slightly touch on that if you'd like to see with the next slide there, please. Oh, I think, did we have another one before that? Either way. Well, as the processing gets faster. You want to take a look at a screen grab that we have here. Improved latency, improved resolution, working with game developers, because historically in the past, developers would always give up resolution for frame rate. So we're trying to find a way that we can find a happy medium where we can keep the latency and the immersion and experience that the gamer might have, intact, and make it just more immersive. I myself, as a gamer, I find this incredibly intriguing, and I'm glad to see that filmmakers and game developers are talking. They are talking, and I think the future of gaming and the future of filmmaking is going to benefit hugely from this. So, during talking about 2020 and these really unprecedented times, studios are facing a whole host of new challenges and looking to more innovative techniques for shooting their movies and TV shows. This has led to the advent of virtual production. Virtual production has been around for quite a while, but what were the initial benefits have now become secondary benefits, where safety is very important and resolution is very important. With these virtual backgrounds, we are getting up to extreme resolutions, 8K and 12K, even if we're just capturing for a 4K exhibition. We benefit greatly that 4K output by shooting and using higher resolutions. So I really think it's a truly exciting time to be a filmmaker. I think it's a truly exciting time to be a consumer, because consumers are demanding more from manufacturers, from filmmakers, from studios. I could pretty much sum up this presentation with a conversation I had with my next door neighbor the other day, as he was getting a brand new 82-inch display delivered to his house. And of course I went up and I said hello, and oh, what did you get? This is great, but why did you get it? And the answer was very simple. It was, well, if I'm going to be spending 20 hours a day at home, I want to be getting the most out of the content that is available to me. So I think that was a very poignant point, is that it comes down to the consumers. They're demanding more, and I look forward from a manufacturing standpoint with Samsung, is really listening to them and delivering what they want. Similarly, working hand in hand with filmmakers and game developers. I think it's a really exciting time right now. Innovation never stops, and technology is right there at our fingertips. I look forward to the next iteration of this, and how 8K and higher resolutions can touch a number of different industries. At that point, I think I'm going to hand it back to you, Geoff, if you don't mind.
Yeah, that's great. Thanks, Des. It's great to hear how this is happening in real, back in the with consumers. One question. Your neighbor, I'm afraid to ask, was it a Samsung?
It was a Samsung. I wouldn't have brought it up if it wasn't. I would have found another way to curtail. So that was good. Yes.
Perfect.
Good question.
I gotta work on building out my display area so I can actually fit an 80-inch TV and plus in my house, but we'll get there. Great, thanks. Thanks everybody. I just want to sum up what we've done here before we get into the Q&A. So Ariana, can you go to the next slide? Thank you. So quickly, what we have learned, a couple things I've gotten from this that I jotted down earlier. 8K is no longer something that's out there in the future. It's happening today, and we all need to be prepared. And obviously, we know we are getting prepared here, at least from the 3 organizations we're hearing from on our call today. The devices are here, and so is the content. We're seeing the cameras to capture, TVs and gaming systems to display, and the content being delivered by NHK, YouTube, Vimeo, and more. And something we haven't really touched on that much is we're also seeing some live sporting events, including that we would have at least seen the Tokyo Olympics broadcast in 8K in some parts as well. We'll be seeing that over the next summer instead. On the software side, we're using existing codecs like HEVC and AV1 today while developing for the next generation like VBC, LC, EBC, and EBC. The smart technology is available for upscaling and downscaling. and the industry is determined to make storage, playback, and archiving just as seamless as it is today, and those next generation codecs will help with that. For MainConcept, we have technology available today that makes 8K encoding much more affordable and efficient. Our hybrid HEVC acceleration can get you there today at a fraction of the cost, and you can tie in our live encoder to get it going out of the box. And finally, we haven't really touched on the pandemic directly, but that's altered, obviously, how content is captured and played back today. It's led to leading virtual production, which is something Des had just referred to. And that's something they're using for those backgrounds and exterior shots, as well as smart cropping, also something we didn't really touch on today. So I think one thing to summarize all that is that adversity brings innovation, and we're certainly seeing a lot of that today. And we're definitely working towards that within this industry. Next slide. Now, before we jump into the Q&A, I just want to spend one on MainConcept and really how everything we've talked about today ties back to what we're doing today as well. So as Nick mentioned, we have FFmpeg. We actually recently introduced our FFmpeg plugins for HEVC, which includes the 8K features, as well as ABC. So this gives you more options for using our industry-leading codecs, making them easy to integrate with better performance than open source, as well as advanced features. Next is we also have a beta program. We recently expanded it and opened it up to more people. Beta testers get early access to our technology, and they get the ability to provide direct input. We currently have betas for ARM and GStreamer, with more being added soon, including one for an app plugin for one of the most popular professional video editing tools. A little mysterious there, but look to see that in the next couple of weeks. You can sign up for the beta program today and look back often just to see what different products are being made available, and you can make your voice heard. And then speaking of ARM, with Apple moving to ARM and more Windows devices coming out that support it, it's not too soon to be planning your transition. So our ARM desktop beta is available today for both Windows and Mac OS. We expect the first commercial version of that to be available before the end of this year. And finally, our professional services team offers the ability to optimize for your unique environment, allowing you to stay focused, remove roadblocks, save time and money, and be confident in your technology. They did this for Endeavor Streaming, and they can do it for you. Schedule a free consultation with one of our video architects to understand how they can help. You can learn about all that and more at mainconcept.com, or you can email us anytime at marketing@mainconcept.com. Thanks for listening to that. Now let's jump into our Q&A. I appreciate everybody sticking around. We're a bit over time here, but we can bring our panelists back. And we've got a question we had that was submitted through the Q&A form. I also have a couple that were sent via email. So let me go through those. I think if we can, let me see. Oh, okay, well, easy question. Will slides from all the presenters be available? Yes, those will be made available as well as this entire presentation. And we also will have a version of Thomas's demo available that was also asked by Chris Porter. Thanks, Chris.
I can probably take the first question.
Yep.
Should you skip that? Yeah, MainConcept does still support and heavily supports the Mac platform, and that is not only the future ARM Mac platforms with our technologies, but it's also the current x86 platform that we are supporting with all our technologies. It is at some point a limitation that we have because the hardware is limited on Macs. So you wouldn't easily have the hybrid GPU options available there. So that is something we do not support on Mac, but all the software technologies and software codecs are also available for Mac. That was the first question.
Yep. Yeah, thanks. So one other question from Chris Porter. ASCII 3.0 is spec'd to support 4K HDR. Is anyone working with them to include support of 8K downscaling and metadata decoding? I guess that could be probably Thomas and maybe even Chris.
It's probably more for Chris.
Well, I mean, I'm not a member of the ATSC 3.0 next gen committees, so I don't know specifically what's going on within there. But I have not heard any whispers or rumors of any activity for 8K, so that's about all I can say.
It's pretty much the same as probably for our MainConcept. We do follow the ATC spec, of course, but we're not working with them on, a new format. We implement those standards that are coming out of the group, and that's where we will adopt, all the new formats. But we haven't been working with them on the downscaling or scaling technologies yet.
Thanks. Okay, I do have a couple additional questions via email. The first one is, actually we'll probably go to Chris. HEVC, AV1, VVC, LCEVC, are all of these codecs available and in development? How do I prepare for all eventualities? Or do you think one will dominate?
One codec to dominate them all.
Right.
There's a movie on that, I think. No, I don't think you'll see one codec dominate again the way that historically has been the case. All of them are either available or will be available very shortly. They're all in the final stage. Some of them are in the final stages of ratification. But then they're going to have to be physically implemented in software and hardware, and then rolled out in products to see practical rollouts. But from some of the webinars that I've been listening to specifically around this, I think the thinking is that each of these codecs will find a niche. Some will be better perhaps for mobile applications. Some will be better for more heavy-duty 8K type applications or VR applications. So we don't know what the answer is going to be, but I think the consensus is that there'll be multiple codecs going forward, and the reality is that you will probably have to support 1, 2, or 3 depending where you sit in the ecosystem.
Just Geoff, let me quickly add to that. I would actually support what Chris just said. The fact also is that, there's different licensing models behind these codecs nowadays. That also just means that there will be niches and different use cases for the codecs themselves. So you will find those in production, you will find other codecs in the delivery, and even on the contribution and all the use cases. There will be difference just also from the technology, but also from the licensing model themselves.
Okay, great. So we got a bunch more questions, but since we're a bit over, I'm going to throw out one more question, and this one is for Des, and then we'll wrap it up. So Des, this one's for you. You mentioned innovation comes from the smaller filmmakers. Well, that sounds great. How can they afford the new hardware and storage costs associated with such a move? I think you addressed a bit of that already in your talk.
Yeah, I can certainly elaborate. In regards to camera workflow, and even in post-production, the costs are coming down significantly at a much faster rate than 4K did when 4K was adopted. Its processing power has gotten faster, storage has gotten cheaper, and post-production is a very competitive industry. So I've already seen the costs. Myself and Chris were working on a project recently where they wanted to reconform the project at 8K from a 4K master. And this was virtually automatic, getting back to with a solid EDL, an edit decision list, getting back to the raw 8K data was literally the flick of a switch. So this was not something that was as easily accessible 7 or 8 years ago, but it is now. So as we move, ultimately, we're going to see over the next year or two, the costs are going to come down even more as 8K becomes adopted more. I can see it happening faster than 4K did. And certainly without giving you specific examples, I can see it just becoming more accessible based on cost to filmmakers and independent filmmakers. It was actually independent filmmakers that we've been dealing with now are the ones that have really kicked off AK acquisition and embracing it. Filmmakers we're talking to in Europe as well, independent filmmakers, they are pushing ahead with AK, while studios are waiting. So I think I might have answered that before, but cost, yes, the data footprint is considerably larger than 4K, but processing power and storage is getting cheaper, and we're going to see a faster move, I believe.
I know last week on Chris's webinar, he gave an example of an 8K camera, I think from Blackmagic, that was reasonably affordable compared to other things we're seeing out there too.
Oh, Blackmagic's 12K camera. Yes, that is, it is, yeah, it is very affordable.
Yeah, it's $10,000.
Mm-hmm.
I'll take two.
That's a beautiful camera, very ergonomically designed, and yeah, it's not a scary camera.
In fact, we're already talking with a filmmaker that's got one of those early cameras and is planning on going out and doing a shoot this year. So this is happening. And he's an independent filmmaker. So there you go.
Perfect. Perfect answer to the question, and a perfect way to close this out. So thank you to Chris, Des, Thomas, Nick. Thank you guys for all joining us. Everybody who's on the call, everybody's going to watch this later on. Appreciate you taking the time to spending with us. Again, if you have any questions for MainConcept, you can email us at marketing@mainconcept.com, and look for future webinars as well.
Thanks again.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.